When I was a child, my grandfather used to tell me about the time when the sky was a deep blue and rain fell from the clouds like a gift. People would stand in it, arms wide, letting droplets trickle through their hair and soak their clothes. I was too young to remember seeing it for myself. By the time I was old enough to retain any real memories, the storms had arrived, thick with dust and debris. Nobody talked about fresh rain anymore. People only spoke of survival, of hiding, of filters and masks, of going deeper into the ground. My family was among the first to move below the surface when the government announced the construction of an underground city. Above-ground dwellers kept hoping the storms would pass, that the dryness would relent. But neither happened. Instead, layer by layer, dust buried highways, cars, entire neighborhoods. Enormous dunes, whipped up by relentless winds, consumed skyscrapers as if Mother Earth wanted to swallow any sign of our former world. But no matter how deep we dug, the dust managed to sneak in. Even now, decades later, we still sweep gritty layers of it off our floors each morning. Growing up underground was both suffocating and strangely comforting. The corridors were cramped, the air stale, and artificial lights replaced the sun's warmth. There was a sense of security in knowing the dust storms outside couldn't reach us here. We had what was left of civilization: a few schools, communal kitchens, dormitory-like apartments, and a leadership council that decided if we'd risk expeditions to the surface. The distribution of resources was strictly regulated. Water came from massive vapor-collecting machines, old prototypes from the time when scientists believed they could harvest humidity from the dead air. We all knew it was never enough. I remember the day my grandfather died. He struggled to breathe, his lungs choked by the thick air of the lower levels. We tried to move him to an upper-tier apartment, one rumored to have slightly better ventilation, but it was too late. He looked me in the eye and whispered, "It used to be blue, Tessa. Promise me you'll see the sky someday." I had no words, only tears. After that, I grew fascinated with the idea of going to the surface. I knew it was dangerous, but I also knew it was necessary for me to honor his final wish. The question that haunted me was whether the sky was still blue or just another dusty gray. Despite the lingering dreams of finding a better life, daily reality in the underground city took precedence. My friend Jonas worked long hours maintaining the air filtration systems. With each wheeze of the grinders and fans, he'd become more anxious. He'd say, "If these machines fail, we won't last a week. We're hanging by a thread." His eyes, always bloodshot from lack of quality air, reflected the ever-present tension. Others tried to keep morale up by organizing small gatherings or music sessions, but fear was our constant companion. The real crisis began slowly. The water harvesters that provided us with our meager daily ration began underperforming. An engineer named Pilar led a task force to figure out why. She found that the dryness in the air was intensifying beyond predicted levels, making it impossible for the machines to gather enough moisture. Our water rations were cut. The council enforced mandatory shower schedules, rationing them to once every 2 weeks, and drinking water had to be carefully measured. People began hoarding, and rumors flew about hidden water caches. There were whisperings about sabotage, though no one had any evidence. One morning, a ragged paint woman burst into the dining hall, screaming that her son had collapsed from dehydration. The few medics rushed to help, but the best they could do was redistribute water among families, a short-term solution that fueled more resentment. Fights broke out over everything, from who got a second spoonful of soup to whose turn it was to use the shower cubicles. We were fraying at the seams, the social glue holding our fragile community together growing weaker by the day. I was in the hallway outside the council's chamber when I heard the faint sobbing of a young boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, crouched behind a potted plant that was wilted for lack of water. His name was Eric, and he just wanted to go home. I asked him where his parents were. He mumbled that his father was up in the filtration lab trying to fix the machines, and his mother had gone on a ration run but hadn't returned. Taking his small hand, I led him to the small apartment I shared with Jonas. 2 rooms, a small sink, and battered chairs. I offered Eric a cup of water, almost half of my daily ration. The look of relief on his face made the sacrifice worth it. Jonas found us an hour later, hauling a pack of filters over his shoulder. He was exhausted. His dusty jumpsuit clung to his wiry frame, and streaks of black smeared his face. He sank onto the chair and, after a moment, announced that Pilar had a new plan. There was an abandoned facility near the edge of the old city center, above ground. ONSA Scientific Center focused on atmospheric studies. Rumor had it they might still have a sealed chamber with stored water. The council believed it was a myth, but Pilar thought otherwise. She wanted to assemble a small team to investigate. Jonas was invited, and he thought I should come too. My heart pounded with both excitement and dread. The dust storms up there could strip flesh from bone if you were caught unprepared. Despite the danger, I agreed to go. Even then, I knew that if there was any chance of finding water, I had a duty to try. My grandfather's final wish echoed inside me. He'd always wanted me to see the sky. Even if the sky was now little more than a haze of brownish gray, I had to look upon it with my own eyes. The next few days were spent in frantic preparation. We gathered oxygen tanks, protective suits, masks, and a variety of tools to cut through any debris we might encounter. By the time the day of departure arrived, we had a team of 8, including Pilar, Jonas, myself, and 5 other volunteers with various skills and mechanics, a medic, and even a botanist who believed that if we found water, he could try to grow food again. The council held a small ceremony before we left. A few solemn words, a reminder that we represented the hopes of everyone below. People lined the corridors and watched us climb the cracked concrete stairs that spiraled upward. Light flickered above from old emergency bulbs, the higher sections battered by debris and half collapsed. My heart thumped in my chest. Eric stood with his father, tears running down his dusty cheeks. I gave him a nod of reassurance. In that moment, I felt the weight of the entire underground city pressing on my shoulders. Emerging onto the surface was like walking into a nightmare. My first sensation was a biting wind that whipped stinging particles against my visor. Beyond the battered entrance, endless dunes of dust stretched in every direction. Twisted metal beams protruded from some piles, remnants of buildings that used to scrape the heavens. The sky itself was a flat, ominous gray, tinged with brown at the horizon. Clouds of dust billowed into the air whenever the wind gusted, creating a perpetual haze that blurred the outlines of distant structures. We formed a tight group, careful to monitor each other's suits for leaks or malfunctioning filters. Conversation was minimal. It was too risky to remove our masks, and the howling wind drowned out all but the loudest shouts. Pilar led the way using a handheld scanner that supposedly detected traces of humidity. Every so often she would stop, check the readouts, and shake her head in frustration as we trudged on. Hours passed without any real sign of success. Then, something changed. The scanner beeped faintly, indicating a slight moisture spike. Pilar's eyes lit up behind her visor. She waved us forward, and we followed her over a ridge of dust. What we saw on the other side was a sizable, half-buried building with the letters ATMO Lab in chipped paint across a collapsed entrance. We had to clear debris from the doors to get inside, cutting through twisted metal with a portable torch. Once we managed to enter, we found ourselves in a large foyer, the ceiling half caved in. Dust covered every surface, but with relief we noticed that the structure still seemed somewhat intact. Broken light fixtures dangled precariously above us. Our flashlights illuminated hallways that disappeared into darkness, and the flicker of our beams revealed shattered glass panels, scattered papers, and signs that read Research Wing and Laboratory A. Pilar's scanner indicated that the levels of moisture inside were measurably higher than outside. We pressed deeper, the air a little more bearable as the building offered shelter from the gale. We found Laboratory A behind double doors sealed with rusted clamps. After prying them open, we discovered a row of large cylindrical tanks. At first glance, it was impossible to tell if they were empty or full. Jonas climbed a rickety ladder to check the gauge atop the first cylinder. He shouted through his comm system, "There's something in here." It looked like fluid, or at least some form of condensed vapor. We needed to verify if it was potable water or something else entirely. The medic, a woman named Darcy, used her test kit to take a small sample through a valve. The result left her speechless for a moment. "It's water," she finally breathed. "Likely sterile, but we need to run more tests to be sure." Elated, we barely noticed the hours it took to check all the tanks. 3 of them were partially filled with water that looked promising. We estimated there could be enough to supply the underground city for at least several months. Our euphoria was tempered, though, by a harsh truth. Transporting that volume of water back was no simple endeavor. We didn't have the right equipment to seal and move the tanks. One wrong move and the precious liquid would be lost to the hungry dust outside. Pilar proposed we set up a makeshift pump system. We'd fill smaller containers and carry them underground in multiple trips. Her plan seemed logical, but it would be time-consuming and could expose us to more dust storms. Still, no one argued. This was our best chance. We set up camp in a side corridor that was less damaged, sealing off the doors with plastic sheeting to keep the dust out as best we could. We laid out sleeping bags, carefully rationed our food, and took turns running the pump and purifying the water. Each container we filled felt like a small victory. But on the second night, the wind outside grew more violent. We heard it shrieking through the cracks of the old building. Dust seeped through every gap. Our flashlights flickered ominously, and Jonas worried the storms might cave in the weaker sections of the lab. On the 3rd day, we decided to start hauling the containers we had filled back to the underground city. By then, we had enough water to fill 4 containers, each carried in pairs by members of the team. We would return for the rest later, if weather permitted. The walk back was grueling. The wind had picked up even more, obscuring all vision past a few meters. At times, we had to huddle in shallow crevasses, while the dust raged around us like a furious animal. Progress was slow, with frequent stops to check oxygen and rest. It was during one of these forced breaks that Jonas spotted something on the horizon. Faint lights bobbing through the dusty air. I squinted through the swirling grit. There were figures out there, moving in a pack. At first, we feared they might be bandits or scavengers who roamed above ground, looting anything left behind. But as they drew nearer, we realized they wore suits like ours. Pilar raised her hand in a tentative wave. Then came a crackling on our radio channel, a male voice asking who we were. We exchanged cautious greetings, only to discover that this group was from another settlement across the ravaged plains. They too had gone underground, but their city was failing, air filtration systems breaking beyond repair, no water harvesters running. They'd come to scavenge anything they could find or to search for new refuge. Pilar and Jonas conferred quietly while the rest of us formed a small semicircle around the group. They were desperate, gaunt, with suits patched in multiple places. Their leader, Kai, spoke in a tone of polite urgency. He said that they'd heard rumors of a functioning city underground. If we knew such a place, would we be willing to let them join us? It was an uncomfortable question. Our own resources were already stretched to the breaking point. Bringing in more people could mean faster depletion of water, less space, and potential conflict. Yet turning them away felt cruel and inhuman. Eventually, Pilar made the call. She told them about our city and the precarious conditions below. She emphasized that if they joined, they must help maintain the settlement. Kai's group agreed, relief flooding their voices. Our return trek was slowed even more, now with extra people who needed guidance and water. But we pressed on, protecting the containers as though they were priceless artifacts. At last we reached the entrance to our underground city, battered and caked in dust. The gates creaked open to reveal a crowd that had gathered to witness our return. Everyone cheered when they spotted the sealed containers, understanding the significance of their contents. We brought them in carefully, handing them over to a thankful council. People hugged us, choked up with gratitude and relief. Even Eric was there, clinging to his father's hand, looking at us like heroes from a forgotten tale. The following day carried a bittersweet tone. We had succeeded in bringing back water enough to ease rationing for a while, but we had also brought new mouths to feed. Some in the community grumbled about it. A few, especially those who had lost loved ones recently, saw the newcomers as a burden. Others believed it was a moral victory, that we couldn't just abandon fellow survivors. Hidden tensions flared as the council deliberated how to integrate Kai's group and how to retrieve the remaining water from the lab. Days turned into weeks. The initial fervor of hope started to fade. People realized that, although we had some water, it was only a temporary fix. We still needed a long-term solution. The dust storms above ground seemed to grow fiercer, and the dryness of the air made the harvesters nearly impossible to operate effectively. Pilar spent her days tinkering with new designs, hoping to improve the harvesters. Jonas worked around the clock repairing failing filtration systems. I helped where I could, but my mind wandered to thoughts of an even more drastic solution. What if we found a place where dust hadn't taken over, some rumored oasis or distant coastline preserved by luck or natural barriers? The idea seemed far-fetched, but so had the notion of water in the old atmospheric lab. The tension reached its boiling point when the council announced a mandatory meeting. They revealed a plan to send a large expedition to the lab to retrieve all remaining water and salvage more equipment. With better gear, we might be able to isolate and replicate parts of those old atmospheric systems down here. However, it would require a massive effort: volunteers, protective suits, toolkits, and the very real risk that the storms could trap them above ground. Some in the crowd demanded an alternative, claiming we should fortify our existing systems rather than risk more lives. Others agreed with the council. The debate was heated, with shouting and accusations of cowardice. That night, Jonas, Pilar, and I gathered in my cramped apartment and mulled over the possible outcomes. Jonas was adamant that if we didn't retrieve more equipment, we risked a slow death underground. Pilar was more reserved, acknowledging that the mission was fraught with danger, but that the city's prospects without it were grim. I listened to them, remembering my grandfather's words. I saw how limited our options were. Our community was literally running out of breath and water. If we failed to act, we would dwindle one by one into the dust. We formed a plan to optimize our chances. We'd equip the expedition with reinforced suits and multiple layers of filtration, giving them a higher survival probability in the storms. We'd stockpile enough portable oxygen to last them for an extended mission. If they managed to secure the remaining water and salvage key components from the old lab, we could potentially replicate that technology below ground. Perhaps, then, there might be a glimmer of a future. Life might expand beyond ration cards, beyond the claustrophobia of narrow corridors. The next morning, I stood at the threshold once more, this time not as a member of the expedition, but as a guide helping them prepare. When the expedition members moved out, their suits glinting in the artificial light, I felt a catch in my throat. Hope is a fragile thing. It can spark revolutions or wither at the first sign of failure. I remembered how small Eric's hand felt in mine, and how my grandfather's eyes shone with the memory of a sky once blue. I shut the gate behind the expedition, wishing them safe travels in a silent prayer. After they left, the rest of us waited in uneasy anticipation. Time crawled by. Days stretched into nights filled with the hum of machinery and murmured worries. Some people clung to each other in the dim corridors, while others busied themselves with tasks to keep their minds off the danger. A thick tension settled over the city. We were at a crossroads. Either we had a chance to reclaim some semblance of life, or we would remain entombed here, watching our futures slip away like grains of dust through our fingers. On the seventh day, a crackle came through the radio channels. We all crowded around the central console, straining to hear. It was Pilar's voice, distorted but unmistakably hers. She reported that the mission had been successful in securing the water, though a large dust storm destroyed a portion of the lab. More importantly, they had recovered vital components from the facility, condensation units, and advanced filtration designs. The cheering that erupted in the command room felt electric, a burst of joy rarely heard within these confined spaces. They returned, battered but triumphant, carrying enough water to replenish our stores for many months. The city erupted into celebrations, tempered by exhaustion. While some danced in cramped spaces, others knelt in silent gratitude. Kai's group helped unload the supplies, forging new bonds with people who realized that cooperation was our only path forward. Hope blossomed, albeit tentatively, in our underground corridors. As the water tanks were integrated into our supply system, the council announced we could finally increase the ration for daily use. Even the simple pleasure of a slightly longer shower felt like a luxury out of a forgotten era. The new components, once analyzed and adapted, offered the promise of producing water at higher yields than ever before. Jonas and Pilar, along with a team of engineers, worked tirelessly to make these systems functional in the confines of our subterranean world. Still, each of us remembered the surface we had glimpsed, the swirling madness of dust, the cataclysmic force that had devoured entire cities. We wondered if the world would ever heal enough for us to walk on dry land without protective suits. We wondered if children like Eric would ever know the taste of raindrops or feel a cool breeze on their skin. Maybe that dream was too large for our generation, but the faint possibility of it lingered in every conversation about the future. Late one evening, as the machinery hummed softly and the communal lights dimmed, I found myself alone in the uppermost corridor, the place where we had first descended from the surface. Dust trickled through the cracks in the door. I remembered my grandfather's eyes as he whispered about the blue sky. Placing my palms against the gritty metal, I smiled to myself. We might live underground, but hope was alive here, and so long as hope existed, there was a chance that one day the storms might subside and the sky could clear again. If that day ever came, I vowed to be ready to see it for myself, just as I had promised him all those years ago.